Had two questions that are closely related here, so I grouped them together, and I'll just read them both. Kevin Jordan asks, is society's obsession with the anti-hero, Batman, Shaft, anyone who ever played by Clint Eastwood, a commentary on the degradation of society as a whole? The only way to achieve true justice is to exit the restrictions of a corrupt society. And Bradley Hope says, why have the stories changed where we used to root for the good guy, White Hat, and now the story wants us to root for the bad guy, Black Hat? Breaking Bad is the best example of this, but there are many others. Why do I like the anti-hero more than the hero? That's a great question, because that's really it. Why do I like the anti-hero more than the hero? I think if you're going to address this problem, you have to understand that I like the anti-hero better than the hero too. At least in the case of how it was traditionally done. Now, American Sniper scared the daylights out of the Hollywood left because it was a hero that you not only could like, but that you actually just loved. You just loved the guy. You loved what he did. You loved the sacrifices he made. You got to see the price he was paying for protecting all of us, and the fact that he wasn't conflicted about going out there and shooting bad guys. And when you asked, how do you feel when you pull the trigger on, what do you feel when you pull the trigger on a terrorist? Recoil, that kind of guy. Terrified them because Kyle in American Sniper is not an anti-hero. He's a hero, and he's an attractive hero, and people loved him, and that's deadly dangerous to the left. But you have to understand the history of the anti-hero and where the anti-hero idea came from. And it's not without justification. If you look back in the late 50s, maybe early 60s, Clint Eastwood, tough guy, awesome anti-hero Clint Eastwood, was in a movie, I think he was in Paint Your Wagon, wasn't he? Somebody's going to correct me in a second. Pretty sure he was. But you got to remember what they were making back then, Oklahoma and Paint Your Wagon and 7 Brides for 7 Brothers and, just this, the Music Man, and just this pap. Some of these are good films, I guess, if you like that kind of stuff, but they're, Doris Day. Honestly, Doris Day, leading American movie star. Is there anybody more bland than Doris Day? So it was boring. It wasn't like it was in the 30s and even in the 40s. It was just boring. And how many westerns, we were talking about the Wilhelm screen. I mean, how many westerns did they make in Hollywood? Thousands? You can only do this so many times. So the reason the anti-hero started to get a little traction is because when you had movies like, 7 Brides for 7 Brothers or Paint Your Wagon or Music Man, and along comes Easy Rider, it's like, what? What the hell is this? This is different. This is interesting, and especially for young people. It's cool. It's rebellious. Rebellion is what it's all about. Rebellion is an American trait. We're wired for rebellion. We're here because of a rebellion, and Hollywood had gotten so mainstream and so conservative in the worst sense of the word, just conservative in movies, not about conservative principles, just not taking any risks at all. You look at some of these historical dramas, and they're lit in a studio. It's like just this genuine, bloody, awful kind of wall of light, wall of sound. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. So, of course, the anti-hero came out. And I think there's a much more, that's part of it. And I think it's also interesting to understand this. A lot of people are saying Outlaw Josie Wells, definite anti-hero. And the man, the man, what did they call Clint Eastwood in the spaghetti westerns? The man who, the silent man, or the man who didn't speak, something like that. So I think I got a question coming up about whether I pick Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. I'm pretty sure I take it. I'm going to take it now. I want to make sure I give credit to the person who asked it. Here it is. Kevin Jordan is the last question I wrote, but I'm going to take it right now. Clint Eastwood or John Wayne? Kevin Jordan asks. Clint Eastwood, man. I mean, John Wayne's a legend, but Clint Eastwood in a barrel. I don't want to ever be on record as saying anything bad about John Wayne. I mean, John Wayne, there apparently was an actual attempt by Stalin to assassinate John Wayne because John Wayne was America. And I don't want to say anything bad about the guy. And now I'm about to say something, derogatory about the guy, but I mean no reflection on John Wayne, who truly is one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. But John Wayne can't act. John Wayne's not an actor. John Wayne maybe did a little acting in Rooster Cogburn or what was that one they just remade? Hate it when my mind just goes. True Grit. He was okay in that, but he's not. he's not the man with no name. Thanks, guys. But he's not a great actor. Now, Clint Eastwood is a great actor. Clint Eastwood is a great actor. You watch him in Unforgiven or Gran Torino, he's a great actor. But it's not just a question of the chops of Clint Eastwood versus John Wayne. If you have an anti-hero, let's take Unforgiven, for example, versus somebody in Stagecoach or Fort Apache or John Wayne movie or something like that. All John Wayne has to do is be heroic and brave. What Clint Eastwood has to do is he has to be heroic and brave and hate it at the same time. And that's much more interesting. It's much, much, much more interesting to watch. There's kind of a crossover, sort of a middle thing with the Gary Cooper character in High Noon, because that character is a hero. There's no question he's a hero. I think he's the greatest hero ever, frankly. I think the Gary Cooper character in High Noon is the greatest heroic story ever written. But he's not happy, and he's not getting the support he needs, and he's not pleased about it. And you get the feeling he wants to run away. So that's interesting. That's interesting. It's just much more interesting. An anti-hero is not the same as the villain. That's an important distinction to make. One of the things about the villain is that the villain arrives fully fleshed and the villain doesn't change. This is just elementary screenwriting. It's elementary storytelling. The villain arrives fully formed and he doesn't change. And since he doesn't change, in so many cases the villain is much more interesting than the protagonist, especially if the story's told well. Darth Vader, when he comes through that open mouth of hell, he's pretty much Darth Vader. He doesn't really change. At the very end of the third movie he changes, but through 3 movies he's just an evil force of death and murder. Luke Skywalker, on the other hand, starts out as nothing. Luke Skywalker is a whiny crybaby kid. He's just a little baby. I want to go to sky. I want to go fly. Well, you don't get to do that, Luke. You got to go to another year out on the moisture farm. And he just whines and cries his way through the movie, and Luke Skywalker doesn't get interesting until the second movie, when he starts to take some loss and feel some pain. And then finally in the third movie, Luke Skywalker transcends character. He's the only guy who transcends his character. When Luke Skywalker throws that lightsaber down the pit in the third movie, he becomes a greater person than Han Solo, and a greater person than Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a more interesting person than Han Solo. If you were to say that at the first movie, this is a giant arc, and I'll get back to this in a minute, but if you look at the Star Wars trilogy as one movie with a big arc, a character arc, that has to happen to the protagonist, and you can't have the protagonist start out as the king, as the transcendent character, because he hasn't gone anywhere. So you actually have to artificially lower your protagonist and make him just this piece of putty. So when you watch the first movie, the first Star Wars movie, you see Luke, and it's like, what's Luke? He's a good-looking kid. He's a nothing burger. Han is the guy. Han Solo, like the villain, doesn't change. He softens a little bit, but he always had the heart of gold. So he's a rogue, and he's an adventurer, and he's interesting, and he's dramatic, and he's sexy. He's all these other things. And he comes in fully formed, and you think, oh, Han Solo is 100 times the character that Luke Skywalker is. But Han Solo doesn't change. In the third movie, Luke transcends humanity in a way. He becomes the Jedi. He becomes the god. He becomes the king. He becomes the king because he threw away power. Same thing with Aragorn. Aragorn, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he starts out as a dusty vagabond living in a pit. He's in a corner at this bar in Bree, at this tavern, and he's a shadowy figure. Nobody knows anything about him. And over time, we begin to realize that he is destined for greatness, but he doesn't want any part of it. He's afraid. He's afraid of what he's really afraid of. He's afraid of the same thing that Luke is afraid of. He's afraid he's going to become his father and screw things up. So, Luke and Aragorn, the same characters. They start out artificially low, so that over the course of the 3-movie arc, they change. And they both change the same way. They have to step up and assume the responsibility of their noble birth. Because Aragorn was born to be the king, and Luke was born to be a Jedi. They just didn't know it. and they have to make a decision, and they have to make that decision when things are down, not when things are up. When things are at the dark night of the soul, they have to step up and do the right thing. And in those two cases, and also in the case of Arthur, all three with swords, all three with father who failed. It's the same story, you see. Star Wars is the same story of Lord of the Rings, the same story as Arthur. In some degree, it's the same story as Superman. You've got, in the case of Arthur, and the case of Luke Skywalker, and the case of Aragorn, people who were raised on farms away from the spotlight because they were of noble birth, who didn't know it and didn't want it, and over time they suffer the hardships and they take the losses. And at the dark night of the soul, they fear that they're going to be their fathers and screw up so badly that the entire kingdom goes to ruin. But at the very end, they transcend their fathers, not by becoming mighty in battle, not because they slaughtered thousands where father couldn't slaughter thousands. They transcend themselves and become the king by throwing away power, by walking away from power. Luke throws his lightsaber into the pit. I'm a Jedi like my father. You're never going to turn me. Arthur throws Excalibur back into the lake. Aragorn takes the ring, which would make him invincible, and puts it back in Frodo's hand and says, I'm always here for you. I've always been here for you and always will be here for you. They walk away from power, and that's what allows them to become the king. That's what makes them noble enough to become the king. They're ready to give it up. They want to give it up. So, your hero, it's easy to make a hero a bad hero. It's very much harder to make a hero interesting. But they did it in those three movies, and we're going to talk about this downstream a little bit more when we start talking about story elements. Downstream, either in this episode or in the next one. But heroes can't be John Wayne, at least traditional John Wayne. John Wayne put more nuance into his characters as he got older. But he can't be the guy who always does right. He can't be the guy who's always dependable, because it's not interesting. And one of the great defects as a writer that most writers have, I certainly had it forever. When I had my key characters, my main characters, the characters who I liked, the people who were the voice of me, I wanted them to be right all the time, and I wanted them to be noble all the time, and I wanted them to stand up, and I wanted them to be cool, and I wanted them to win and succeed. And that's just not interesting. It's not interesting. Setbacks are interesting. Overcoming obstacles are interesting. I didn't want to hurt my own people that way, but you have to learn how to do it. I probably mentioned this once before, but I got into a discussion a long time ago with my acting professor, who I learned so much from, a guy named David Shelton, who taught at the University of Florida. And he was worried, this would be like the maybe early 80s. And just then you start to get into some of this interactive. All right, so we're back. Hopefully most of you are still there, 140 people. I'm just trying to figure out if somebody can let me know what I said last, and I'll just pick it up from there. I know I was talking about the arc of the it's the journey of the hero, really. Anybody want to let me know what I was saying last? This one wasn't my fault. This one just happened. Just got bit. Anyway, I guess we can probably just wrap up this thing, because I've been down this road a little bit before. But just to conclude, the anti-hero is a response to the boringness of the simple hero, the straightforward guy who never. I remember what I was saying. This theater professor of mine named David Shelton was worried that with interactive technology and computers and so on, he was worried that audiences would be able to write the movie just by having people vote, because he did a couple experimental films like that. You get to a point where you have a plot point or a crisis, then you got to pick whether you wanted A or B or C or whatever the case was. And he was worried that would take over and that there wouldn't be a need for writers anymore. And I just said, listen, that's never going to happen, David, because if you have a sympathetic character in a movie theater and you've got 400 people watching the guy, and there comes a conflict, and the conflict means the guy can either go and have something good happen to him or something bad happen to him, he will pick the good thing every time. The audience will pick the good thing to happen. They don't want him to cheat on his wife. They don't want him to break his leg in a crash. They don't want him to do any of these things. And so what they'll do is the audience will protect the hero because they like him, and by protecting him, then they make him not interesting. And that's kind of what the whole John Wayne thing was. John Wayne as an archetype. He's just not as interesting as a guy who's conflicted. And that's the way it is. So you have to, as a writer, you have to have the discipline and the understanding that the dirtier you make this hero, and I say dirty, I don't mean immoral necessarily. I'm not saying you want to make him a bad guy, but the more mud he has to slog through, and the more hardships he has to endure, and the more loss he takes, despite the fact you don't want the guy to take any loss, the more of that he goes through and comes through on the other side, the better that he's going to be as a character, the more people are going to like him. Just requires discipline, just like anything else. So, yeah, that's what I would say about that. And I don't have to be anywhere tonight, so we're going to go a little bit longer. What are we? Oh, I can't keep track now. We're 3 minutes into the second segment. But there's no second segment because it's fixed in the editing. So moving on.